Estimadas amigas y amigos, por segunda vez en este año nos encontramos en esta actividad de diálogo y reflexión conjunta, que hemos denominado Puentes hacia el Futuro.
La incertidumbre es la condición predominante en la vida presente. Experimentamos los cambios sociales, culturales y tecnológicos con una velocidad que nos deja sorprendernos y que nos dificulta el ejercicio de ese atributo esencial del ser humano, la capacidad de adaptación.
Uno de estos cambios es precisamente que la empresa juega un rol que va mucho más allá de su actividad específica, el vínculo con nuestros colaboradores, clientes y con una comunidad de la que formamos parte. Excede lo meramente contractual. Compartimos un espacio y un tiempo común y eso nos demanda comprometernos de una manera más colaborativa.
El objetivo de toda empresa es crear valor para sus accionistas, trabajadores, clientes y para su comunidad. En el pasado se entendió que esto era crear valor económico. Hoy sabemos que eso no es suficiente. Con estos diálogos buscamos crear valor en dimensiones tan humanas como la cultura, la confianza y la diversidad.
Como un verdadero símbolo de esa actitud, de esta mirada más optimista y cercana, desde un nuevo espacio es que el BICE siempre se actualiza y renueva, no solo desde su visión, de su misión y de su entorno, sino que desde una casa nueva, nuevas oficinas, un edificio de última generación tecnológica que albergará el legado y la tradición de todas las generaciones que nos antecedieron.
Hoy les queremos presentar a Daniel Gilbert, autor de Tropezando con la Felicidad, bestseller que vendió más de 1 millón de copias. Estadounidense, psicólogo e investigador de la Universidad de Harvard, es colaborador de medios como Time y The New York Times.
Sus principales intereses están en cómo los seres humanos navegan por las complejidades del tiempo y la vida social.
Probablemente el valor de su trabajo, al menos el que ha sido más destacado, es que usa la ciencia para descubrir las ilusiones de las personas tienen sobre el mundo, sobre sí mismas y su felicidad.
Daniel Gilbert no estará solo, lo acompañará el director del Centro de Estudios Públicos, CEP, Leonidas Montes, con quien entablarán una interesante y enriquecedora conversación.
Ingeniero civil industrial, licenciado en Filosofía y magíster en Ciencia Política por la Pontificia Universidad Católica, PhD, máster en Filosofía en Economía por la Universidad de Cambridge, King College.
Esperamos que esta conferencia nos ayude a entendernos mejor y a tomar mejores decisiones, que nos entregue herramientas para enfrentar con mayor conocimiento las situaciones que nos deparará el futuro. Esperamos que nos ayude a seguir avanzando para lograr ser mejores personas y tener un Chile más feliz.
Queridas amigas, queridos amigos, el futuro nos espera, pero no está determinado ni estamos condenados a aceptar lo que venga. Al otro lado de este puente estará la realidad que nosotros mismos construyamos en nuestro tránsito hacia él.
Eso es, y siempre ha sido, la maravilla de la vida humana. De eso hablaremos hoy con Daniel y Leonidas. Muchas gracias a ambos por acompañarnos y muchas gracias a todos ustedes.
Hello, everybody, and good afternoon, Daniel Gilbert. It is a real pleasure and an honor to have you here in this conversation with Banco BICE. It is actually the first time that Daniel is here in Chile talking to us on his breathtaking, I would say, research on many issues related to social psychology. And well, it is for me a real honor to be hosting this conversation. We will give Daniel the space to present, and then we'll have a conversation. And I finally expect to have some questions from the public that I'm sure will be very interesting. So please go ahead, Daniel, and many thanks for being here finally with us.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, for having me. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here with you, my friend. And I hope the next time we can actually be together in Chile rather than communicating over Zoom. But we're in strange times, and so this will have to do. I'm delighted today to be here to talk about the science of happiness. Now, most people want to know the secret of happiness. Everybody wants to know it, of course. And you probably think that people have always wanted to know this secret. But in fact, this is really one of the world's newest questions, because for most of human history, people didn't ask it. Because for most of human history, life was very hard. Food was scarce. A day of labor was long, good health was short, 70% of your children wouldn't live to adulthood. Basically, our ancestors woke up every morning and they just tried not to die. And in that world, everyone knew the secret of happiness. Happiness is what you would experience if you could get what you wanted. And that never happens to anyone, not at least in this life. So happiness was kind of a mythical state for which one could yearn, but that nobody ever was expecting to experience. And that's how human beings thought about happiness for about 200,000 years. Then something amazing happened. 3 revolutions took place in very rapid succession. There was an agricultural revolution about 10,000 years ago, an industrial revolution about 200 years ago, and a digital revolution just a half a century or so ago. And as a result of these 3 revolutions, for the very first time in human history, large populations of people suddenly have everything they want. Food, clothing, shelter, cars and planes, medicines, microwave ovens, symphony orchestras, retirement plans. Mainly in the places where the lights are on at night, most people have most of these things, and guess what? They're not always happy. The lives most of us are leading today were utterly beyond the imagination of human beings for most of human histories. Even a king did not have what most ordinary citizens of our 2 countries have. And so what do we think of these amazing lives that our ancestors could barely imagine? They're nice, but they're not nirvana, they're not Shangri-La, they're not heaven on earth, they're not everything we want, and they don't bring us endless happiness. In fact, even for those of us who have many times more than anyone could possibly want, they're not always happy all the time. Now think of this. If happiness comes from getting what we want, then these 5 guys should not just be happy, they should be billions of times happier than anyone you know, and they aren't. I've met most of them. They're, well, about as happy as you are and about as happy as I am. And that raises an interesting question, and it's the one I'd like to ponder today. If happiness doesn't automatically happen to us when we get what we want, why do we think it does? Why do we all believe that making billions and changing the way the world works would make us happy? Why do we think that getting cars and houses or marriages and children or promotions and awards, why do we think these things would make us happy? Well, one answer is cultural wisdom. You know, one of the things that makes our species so special is that we have culture, which means that each person doesn't have to discover every truth about life for themselves, right? None of you had to invent algebra or invent the art of making yogurt. All of these things were given to you by those who came before, passed down to you through culture. We are all the recipients of a great deal of cultural wisdom that's handed down through generations. The problem with cultural wisdom is it's not always wise. How do I know this? Because in the last 25 years, scientists have begun to study the causes of human happiness, using all the basic tools of science, the same tools we use to figure out what makes a cancer cell divide, what makes a butterfly migrate. We've begun to discover what does and doesn't make people happy. And what I want to do today is just tell you a little bit about the things scientists have learned. I'm going to start, as I should, by introducing you to my family, my mother in particular. Now, my mother was not a scientist, but she was my first source of cultural wisdom about happiness. Your mother probably was for you too. For my mother, she told me 3 things were important if I wanted to have a happy life. The first is I had to be married. I had to find a nice girl. I had to get married. I had to settle down. Second, my mother told me I needed money. Now, my mother never said the word money, but she would say things like, you should be comfortable, you should be secure, you should not have to worry, by which she meant I needed money. And then third, of course, what do mothers tell their children? You need children. Obviously, what would life be without them? So according to my mother, these were the 3 essential ingredients in the recipe for happiness in life. Now, I always thought this was my mother's recipe, but once I became a scholar, I came to learn this is the recipe of every mother in every culture on the entire planet Earth. All mothers give their children some version of this advice. Find someone to love and a permanent relationship, take care of yourself materially, and have children. Is this advice right? I want to show you what science has to say about each of these 3 things. So let me just start with marriage. Now, does marriage make people happy? Well, if you look at the initial data, it suggests it does, because married people are in fact happier than any other group of people, including people who live together but aren't actually married. And it's not surprising that they're happier. They have more money per person. They have better health. They live longer. They have more sex and enjoy it more. Almost all the things you think are a recipe for happiness, married people have more of it. This is true at every point in the lifespan. Here's a very typical lifespan curve of happiness. And what you see is young people are happy, older people are happy, people in the middle who are doing all the hard work of life, they are the least happy. But what I want to show you is what happens if we break these data down into those who are and aren't married. Here's what we see. Married people show the curve, the midlife dip. Unmarried people show the curve, the midlife dip. But at every point in life, married people are happier than unmarried people. This is also true over time. Here are data. This is the United States, but it's true in all the other countries for which we have good data, just showing changes in happiness over time. You can see some years are better than others, depending on, economic problems, pandemics, things like that. So happiness goes up and down over the years. But what do you notice? That the married people are always happier than the unmarried people. In fact, married people are happier in the worst year than unmarried people are in the best year. The 2 lines never overlap. This is also true if you follow the same people over time. Just measure people as they approach marriage and as they pass the date of their wedding. And what do you see? People are getting happier and happier as they approach marriage. Getting married is a very high point in their lives. There's a honeymoon period in which they're quite happy for about a year or so, and then happiness begins to decline. Does it ever go back to where it started? Probably so. There's some debate about how long, maybe somewhere, let's just say, within 10 to 20 years, it looks like the happiness benefits of marriage begin to wear off. Still, not a bad investment for saying the word yes, 10 to 20 extra years of happiness. Now, of course, some people get more of a happiness boost from marriage than others, and scientists have a word for the people who get the biggest increase in happiness from marriage. We call them men. That's right. Although men often have to be persuaded to get married, and women seem to be a little more eager, it's men who get most of the happiness benefits from marriage, which is why men also do much more poorly than women when their spouse dies. So marriage, okay, my mother seems to have been roughly correct. Now, what about money? People often say to me, oh, money can't buy happiness, but those people must never have met a man who is living under a bridge in a cardboard box, because of course money buys happiness. Money matters, and it matters a lot. On average, rich nations are happier than poor nations. Rich people within nations are happier than poor people within nations. More money equals more happiness, full stop. Every study in economics I've ever seen shows this relationship. Elon Musk is the richest man on earth right now, and he is almost surely happier than this homeless man. There's almost no doubt about it. But here's where the story about money and happiness gets interesting. If we look at the relationship between money and happiness, this is what we see. We see a curve. What does this curve tell us? Well, let's just start by comparing the incomes of 3 people. On one side, we have a homeless man. On the other end, we have Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, and I put myself on this line. And what you can see is that my income is much closer to a person with no income than it is to the income of the richest man on earth. But here's what's interesting. If we put the happiness and money line on this graph, here's where Elon Musk and I are. Even though my income is much closer to the homeless man, my happiness is much closer to Elon Musk. And that's because the line is curved. The Elon Musks of the world are probably a very small bit happier than the Dan Gilberts of the world, but not much. This curve tells us that every peso you earn buys a little less happiness than the one before it. Money matters a lot at first, but it matters less and less and less as you earn more of it, and at some point, it barely matters at all. Why? Why does money stop mattering? Why does this curve flatten? Why doesn't it just keep increasing forever? There are two general reasons. First, earning money is a happiness benefit, but earning money also has a cost. Namely, it takes time. Time we could be spending doing things that actually make us happier than extra money will. I'll give you an example. Most people get happiness from spending time with family and friends. But look at these recent data on how people with high and low incomes spend their time. What do you see? You see that people who earn a lot of money spend more than an extra month per year by themselves in the evenings rather than with family and friends. Human beings are social animals. We naturally get much of our happiness from other people. And if high-income people are giving away that happiness in order to earn more money that will make almost no difference to their happiness, they're making what economists call a very bad trade-off. Now, the second reason why money quickly stops making people happier is that people who have a lot of money generally don't spend it on the right things. I want to show you how happy people are as they engage in numerous ordinary, everyday activities, and you will not see any surprises here. Most people are not very happy when they're working. They're not very happy when they're getting to their jobs, but they like television. They love talking to other people, and guess what? Human beings enjoy sex. Here's the surprise in the data. If you measure how happy people are when they're resting, when they're doing nothing at all, you find that they are about as happy as they are when they are working, even a little bit less. And yet, if you ask people, what would you do if you won the lottery? They typically say, I would quit my job and rest. All right? I would buy a boat. I would just sail and look at the sky and rest. You can see from this graph, resting is a very bad answer. You should have sex while you talk and watch TV, perhaps, but you shouldn't rest. People spend their money on the wrong things because they don't know what kinds of things really bring happiness. Well, scientists do. Scientists have two pieces of advice for you about how you can spend money to more effectively increase your happiness. The first is to spend more money on experiences and less money on things. Experiences seem to give people more happiness, peso for peso, dollar for dollar, than objects do. Why? Because when we have experiences, we usually share them with others, right? If you suddenly were given 2 weeks in Paris, you would bring somebody, probably somebody you liked or loved a lot, and you would be spending that time with them. And the memories you would have of your vacation in Paris would last for a lifetime. You would never try to sell them to someone else, but that's exactly what you will do with the brand new car you buy. It will excite you for a little while, and then it will disappoint you so much you will actually try to get rid of it. The second thing that psychologists have learned about how to spend money is to spend it on other people. Look, I'm not a priest. I'm not a minister. I'm not a rabbi. I'm not here to give you advice and tell you to be a better person. I'm just telling you what the science says. Science tells us that when we spend our money on other people, we often get more happiness than when we spend it on ourselves. So 2 bits of advice about spending money from the science of happiness. Okay. The 3rd thing my mother told me, this should be the easy one, of course. She told me I should get married, I should make money, but then, of course, she told me I should have children and make her a grandmother as quickly as possible. In English, I don't know if we have this phrase in Spanish. In English, we even call children. We name them after happiness. When someone has a baby, we ask, "How is your bundle of joy?" Meaning your little package of happiness. So it will probably surprise you to find that when you measure the happiness of people who do and don't have children, what you find is that parents are less happy than people without children, and parents are the least happy when their children are young and living with them. In fact, you see the same thing if you follow people over time. Measure their happiness before and after they have children, and you typically see a line like this. Couples are happy, and then after the birth of their first child, their happiness goes down. Does it ever come back to where it started? Yes, maybe when the children leave home and the dog dies, their happiness comes back to their baseline. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But it doesn't go over the happiness ever of people who don't have children. It turns out that it's not having children that seems to lower people's happiness. It's just being with them and taking care of them. What you're seeing here on this slide are depression rates for women who work, who do and don't have children. What do you see? They're identical. Having children doesn't affect the rate of depression if you're gone all day. But look at the depression rates of women who stay home with their children. These are US data, by the way. Almost double the rate of depression among women who stay home with their children all day. Are parents miserable? Is that what I'm saying? No, of course not. That's not what I'm saying. If we measure how happy people are as they go about a variety of ordinary activities, you can see here in this particular data set that people are happy when they're talking with their friends. They're pretty happy when they're eating. Grocery shopping is not so much fun, and doing housework nobody enjoys. What about being with children? About the same as doing housework. It isn't misery, it's just boring. It's not that much fun. Now, maybe you believed me when I told you that marriage was good and money was good up to a point, but I know you are skeptical about what I've just told you about children. It surely seems like it is not true for you. Well, guess what? I'm a father, and even better, I'm a grandfather, and it doesn't seem to be true for me either. But that doesn't mean it isn't true. It turns out it is true on average. And that's what I've been telling you about. I've been telling you about how human beings respond on average to having children. If we carefully measure the happiness of people with and without children, we see that those with children are somewhat less happy on average. But even though more parents experience a negative effect of children than a positive effect of children, many parents do show a positive effect. Who are these people? Well, we have a name for them. Once again, we call them men, especially men who are older and men who are married. Older married men seem to get the biggest benefit from having children, the biggest happiness benefit. Conversely, younger single women are the least likely to experience a positive effect of having children. What does that tell you? It tells you what every mother knows. Children are cute and lovable, but they are also hard work. And so the benefits of having children go to the people who do the least work to raise them. And in most societies, probably in all societies, that's men. People who work the hardest in raising children are women, and especially women with fewer resources. Women, younger women who typically have less money, and women who don't have a partner to help them raise children. Look, children can be and should be a source of happiness for human beings. But as long as we have one group of people who gets to enjoy the benefits of the children and another group who always has to clean up after them, the happiness benefits of being a parent will not be equally distributed, and we shouldn't be surprised about it. So it looks like my mother was right about everything. Her lessons about happiness were not wrong, but they were not exactly nuanced. Marriage? Yes, marriage is good, but it turns out it's only good if it's a good marriage. People in bad marriages do not get a happiness benefit from marriage. Money? Well, yes, Mom, money is good, but only to a point. Very quickly, as we earn money, we have enough money to buy as much happiness as we possibly can. It isn't worth trading a lot of time to get even more money when we have enough. And finally, my mother's advice about children was correct. Children can be a source of happiness, but they aren't for everyone. I want to end where I started. In many human languages, the word for happiness happens to be the same or very similar to the word for fortune or luck. And that's because, as I told you at the beginning, for almost all of human history, happiness was luck. It was dumb luck. It was dumb luck that almost no one ever got to experience. What's radically changed on our planet is that in the last century or so, for the very first time, human happiness is not entirely in the hands of fate. It's in the hands of human beings. And so the question is, how do we find it? Our cultural wisdom gives us many answers, but as I hope you've seen, it isn't always perfectly wise. I love my mother, but she's not the person that I turn to when I want to answer questions like, how does a cell divide? Or how is a star born? For those kinds of questions, I turn to science. I hope you can see that what makes human beings happy is a fact about the world, and therefore it is a fact that science can help us discover. My belief, and the reason I've come today to share these interesting facts with you, is that the more we learn about the truth, the more we learn about the facts of happiness, the better our chances of finding it for ourselves and for everyone else around us. So thank you very much for tuning in and listening, and I'm really looking forward to chatting about this topic with my esteemed colleague.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, indeed, fascinating and provocative what you have told us. I would say that all your research is trying in a way to show us that the world is not what it appears and to uncover reality using science and facts in many ways. And the way, the many provocative things that you have told us lead to the idea that in some sense, happiness is not the result of what we aim for, but is something different. You link at the end the idea of happiness with luck. And I'm just remembering Aristotle with his concept of eudaimonia, that happiness is not an end in itself, but the importance is the process. Could you please, you have done a lot of research on this, could you please expand a little bit on that? Happiness is not what we aim for?
Well, I think what I would say is happiness is not what you will get if you aim for the wrong things. So if you have been told that you will be very happy if you can be very rich, you will find out quickly that that wasn't true. That your happiness did increase as you moved from being poor to having enough so you don't worry. but all the millions and billions after made very little difference to your happiness. So if you say, I am going to aim for wealth, that's what I want in life, very quickly you will be disappointed. On the other hand, if you were to aim for good social relationships, if you said, I want to be happy, and the way I'm going to do that is to cultivate relationships with family and friends, to spend time in those relationships, to give to those relationships, you will find your happiness constantly increasing. So I do think we can aim for happiness, just like, we can aim a rocket for the moon, but you have to aim it correctly or else it's not going to get there.
Well, in economics, Daniel, and Richard Thaler, Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, they have worked with this, trying to show that rational economics is not what actually we see in life, and you're doing the same in a way. And in economics, we have this idea of diminishing marginal utility, which is basically the diminishing marginal happiness of wealth at the end of the day, which is basically the same. Why do you think that happens? I mean, why the illusion or the role of imagination in aiming at, and within the process, why do rich people do not realize what's going on? That's my...
Well, have you ever had the experience where you eat a piece of cake and it's wonderful? And so your brain says another piece will also be wonderful. And your brain is right. And then it says another piece will also be wonderful. And suddenly it's not quite as good. Your brain says, no, try a fourth piece. It will really be wonderful. And it's not. There is diminishing marginal enjoyment of the cake. But brains are very simple. They don't understand curves like I showed you with money. Brains just say, if it felt good before, it will feel good again. They don't understand that with each successive bite of cake, each successive dollar we earn, we get less and less happiness out of them. I mean, I really think that if the brain understood the world perfectly, we wouldn't need psychology. We probably wouldn't need economics. What these sciences do is they help us see the world as our ordinary intuition can't. If you stand on the earth, it looks flat, but we know it isn't, it's round, but it looks flat to your eyes. Similarly, I would say that much about life, especially the pursuit of happiness, looks one way to our eyes, but is actually quite different. And science can help us discover what the shape of happiness really is, not just what it looks like from here.
The idea, you told us in the beginning a little bit, a sort of evolutionary history, and when you talk about the brain, I know when you're talking about science, you're referring actually to evolution in the Darwinian sense. And you have done wonderful research on that previously, on the idea that the brain is a sort of, I would say, it has amnesia, and it's like a machine trying to understand our reality and understand our experiences. Could you develop a little bit on that, on the idea of evolution and how our brain evolved and how we can understand actually difficult, elusive concepts like happiness in light of how we have evolved, Daniel, because you have worked on that a lot.
Yes, one of the things we know about brains, well, let me just back up. One of the things we know about human beings that makes us quite unusual is that we think about the future. Not just what will I do this afternoon, but where will I be next month? Where might I retire? We can close our eyes and imagine future time. This is something that, as far as we know, no other animal can do, at least not in the way we can. And the reason we can do it is that there's a part of our brain right up here. It's called the prefrontal cortex. It's the covering of the brain inside, right in this area. And this area allows us to imagine the future in a way that no other animal possibly can. And therefore, to make decisions to guide ourselves into the future wisely, to increase our happiness later, even if that means decreasing it today, right? When I go to the dentist, I don't have happiness. I don't enjoy being there. It always hurts a little bit, and sometimes it hurts a lot. But I do it because I know that having my teeth be in good health will make me happier later. This is something no rabbit could ever do. Give up happiness now for more happiness later. And we can do it only because of this new part of our brain. When I say new, I mean, it's not in the last 5 years, but it's really in the last 2 million years, which sounds like a lot, but in evolutionary time, 2 million is nothing. 2 million years ago, our ancestors could not do the kind of long-term thinking we can do today. And we also know this, if this brain part gets damaged, you can talk to a person and have lovely conversation, and you can ask them about things they have done. But the moment you say, "What will you do tomorrow?" they can't answer you. They stare into space and say, I don't know. I can't find it in my brain because this part of their brain has been damaged. So I hope this answers your question. Evolution has given us this marvelous gift very recently that allows us to look into the future and plan and make decisions that will bring us more happiness. It doesn't mean we always do a good job of it. And I think I've spent the last 20 years of my life trying to find the ways in which this remarkable but new machine makes mistakes, in the hope that if science can understand the mistakes, then individuals can take action to correct them.
Well, we live thinking about the future. We live on expectations at the end of the day, Daniel. But we end up adapting in the sense, and I remember you used the example of Pete Best, which is wonderful. I mean, could you tell us a little bit about that, which is great because it's what we expect and what actually happens and how we adapt to our new reality?
Well, sure. So when we look forward into the future, if we imagine something terrible, all of us say, "Oh my God, if that happens, it will be so bad. I will be so sad. I will be so angry. I will be so scared, and it will ruin my life." All of us feel this way if we think about losing somebody we love, or losing a job, or losing an arm, or going blind. All of these things scare us, and we predict they will make us very, very unhappy. But what research shows is that people adapt very quickly and very well to almost every kind of adversity. So if you ask people, how happy would you be if you went blind? They say, "Oh, it would be so terrible." But if you measure the happiness of people who are blind, they're exactly as happy as everybody else. In fact, one of their biggest complaints is, "Everyone thinks I'm sad. I'm not sad. I'm just blind." We adapt much more quickly than we realize to negative circumstances, and as a result, we are constantly mispredicting how well we would do under bad conditions. Human beings are very resilient. They're very good at picking themselves up in bad circumstances, going forward, and finding happiness. But we don't know this about ourselves. And so we live lives in fear of bad things happening. This thing, that thing, that thing. Oh, if they happen, my life will be over. No, it won't be over. And we know this because these things actually do happen to some people, and scientists can measure their happiness. And guess what? By and large, they're just as happy as everybody else.
In a way, Daniel, we are happier than we imagine. And actually, our founding fathers, your founding fathers, I would say, they would write life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is such a wonderful way to see life and society in a way. And on that area, you have done many things to uncover what happiness is, how we pursue it, the role of imagination in many ways. And when you talk about the others, I mean, For example, you gave us in your presentation the example that we have to worry more on others and less on ourselves. How do you see the role of empathy, or what the Scottish would call sympathy, in terms of how we relate to each other, which is a great issue publicly discussed all around the world now? Our relationship at the end of the day with the others.
Well, many animals, most animals on Earth, are solitary. They don't need any other animals except to mate with or to eat. That's the only use they have. That's the only use a bear has for another bear, is to mate or eat, right? Human beings are not just social. We are, by an order of magnitude, the most social species on Earth, more than ants and termites. We create very complex societies of unrelated individuals. No other animal does this. So, given our inherent sociality, it should not be a surprise that we are designed to get our happiness from the way we connect with other people. You know, sometimes people say, Professor, you're an expert on the science of happiness. Can you just tell me in one sentence what the secret of happiness, what I should do to be happy? If I could only have one sentence, and you notice I like lots of sentences, but if I only had one, I would say family and friends. It's not even a sentence, it's a phrase. It's very simple. And it sounds like something your mother might have told you. Your mother, if she told you that, she was absolutely right. Do you know that the goodness of your relationships with others is a better predictor of happiness than your own health, than your wealth, than your age, than your education? None of those things is nearly as important as having friends you can count on and you feel good about, and having family you love. Without those things, it's difficult to be happy. With those things, it's difficult not to be.
Well, actually, we are inherently social, and I would say, as you say, very social in many ways. And Hobbes in 1651, you know this, he said, in the state of nature, without the social contract, without society, life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So we need others at the end of the day. That is basically the main point. And yes, in this need of the social fabric, let's say, Daniel, what is the role of our relationship with others in terms of, because I mean, the person, the individual who interacts is only in terms of self-interest or pursuit of our own interest, or is something more than that? Is there any genuine, let's say, care for others? What would you say about that?
Well, I think we are born with two separate and powerful desires. One is to help ourselves, and the other is to help other people. Now, everybody knows about the first desire, right? A baby screams, I want food. I want a dry diaper. From the moment a baby's born, it's telling you what it wants. But very quickly, before 1 year is up, babies will demonstrate that they care what other people want. In experiments, 9-month-old, 10-month-old babies who've just started to walk, if they see an adult drop something, they run to pick it up and hand it to the adult. Nobody has trained them to do this. So psychologists are coming to believe that this social empathy, that this desire to be good and help others is as natural as our desire to help ourselves. What I tried to show, and I didn't get to spend much time on it in my presentation, is that we think these desires are often at odds, but often they're the same thing. Because helping other people is a wonderful way to make yourself happy. I often say to people, try this next time you go to buy coffee. at a coffee store. Maybe in America, it's a Starbucks. Instead of getting extra shot of espresso in your coffee, buy coffee for the stranger in back of you. Just say, I'm paying for his. It's a miracle. You will get much more happiness from doing this than from a little extra espresso in your own coffee. I guarantee you, it will be a wonderful experience. The person will be grateful, you will talk, you'll make a friend, you'll laugh, everyone in the store will clap. All because you spent $1 this way rather than that way. So, helping other people and being kind to them is really one of the most selfish things you can do. If you care only about your own happiness, you will give to others because it will make you happy.
Well, that's a wonderful thing to live with, I would say, Daniel. And sorry for my academic bias, but you have recently, related to this, published a paper, a wonderful paper at the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science on conversations, which is very much related to this. I mean, the idea that we as human beings are always sharing with language, ideas, and actually, I would like you to share a little bit the conclusions and the way you proceeded with that research, which is fascinating and is related to this idea that we live with others and others live with us at the end of the day. The social interaction as a way to get happier, and the result is fascinating. So please do.
Well, thanks for inviting me to do that. I think of it as a slightly different topic, but you're right, of course, it's related. We all find that all of our interests are really in one thing, and it takes us a lifetime to discover what that one thing is. And mine, I think, is happiness. Happiness, as I've said, is a result of social interaction, but just sitting in a room quietly with somebody is not a social interaction. Human beings interact by doing what you and I are doing right now, having conversations. In this particular paper that you're describing, we asked a very simple question. Do conversations end when people want them to? Now, you might think conversation is a voluntary activity between two people. And so when you are ready and when I am ready, we finish our conversation. You might think at least a conversation is likely to end when one person wants it. The first person to get tired says, okay, I have to go now. But what we discovered in our research is that this isn't true. Conversations almost never end when anybody wants them to. Conversations go too long for everybody. They go too short for everybody. They go too short for one person and too long for the other. Every way that they can possibly not end properly, they seem to do. In our data, the percentage of conversations that ended when both people wanted them to end was roughly 1%. Almost all conversations do something else. Why? Well, we can only guess. This is a first set of studies. We just wanted to see how close the real duration of conversations was to their desired duration. So we don't know exactly, but our best guess is that people don't leave conversations the moment they want to. Instead, they try to guess when their partner wants to leave because they care about their partner's feelings. The problem is people are terrible at guessing this. They have no idea. In our studies, people had no idea. They thought they knew, but they had no idea when their partner really wanted to go. So many conversations, two people are trying to guess what the other person wants. They can't say what they want because this would be rude and insulting, so they just have to guess, and they make mistakes guessing. And as a result, conversations are what we call in psychology a coordination fiasco, which means two people are trying to coordinate their behavior, but because they have so little information about what the other person wants, they can't do it. With all that said, even in these conversations that went way too long, way too short, everybody had a good time. So it doesn't seem to stop people from enjoying their conversations just because the conversations don't have the duration that they wanted. People love to talk.
Well, we exchange goods and services, but more importantly, we exchange words at the end of the day. And that makes
Yeah.
human beings so different, Daniel, in the pursuit of happiness. Do you think that this exchange of words, of which words are also feelings in a way, because it's not only rational, it's the act of sharing, of interacting, is related to the result you showed that we prefer to work than to be resting? I mean, I found that result pretty amazing. Do you think there is a relationship?
Yes. Well, we know why rest is not so good. When people rest, their mind begins to wander. And for most people, if your mind can go anywhere, it starts to go to your problems. Right? Very few people do this, look into the sky and think about music and love. And no, they start to think about financial worries, relationship problems. Why did she say that to me earlier today? How am I going to afford to send my kid to college? Why does my knee suddenly hurt? So for most people, if the mind is not occupied by talking to another human being or by doing work of your own, it begins to go to less happy places. That's why we're very happy when we're having conversations. Most conversations are about something good, right? Because nobody wants to talk to you if all you talk about is bad things. And therefore, human conversations tend to be very positive. We go, we talk to another person, they keep our mind on the present. But if we are allowed to do nothing whatsoever, our mind floats away, for some people to a very happy place, but for the average person to a less happy place. And that's why happiness goes down. If you had infinite numbers of dollars and you could do anything, you should pay them to have conversations like this one with interesting friends who have a smile on their face about topics you enjoy thinking about. Much, much better than buying a boat, buying an airplane, or doing nothing.
That is fascinating indeed. You cannot buy conversation, you have to share it, which is different at the end of the day.
Exactly right. Yes.
The other thing, Daniel, is related to this idea that you talk about the family, marriage, and kids and all that. And we seem to be, we don't realize probably, but we seem to be very happy with family, with our inner circle. And this is a sociological phenomenon all around the world, that we consider ourselves happy in our inner circle, but we have the impression that society is very bad at the end of the day, that the others are in a terrible situation. How does it? Could you explain that phenomenon? What do you think about this? I would say difficult thing to relate. We are happier with our circle, but we think that society or the others are not in that situation. Why do you think that happens? And it's a global phenomenon.
Yes, we've been studying something related to this recently. We haven't yet finished our first paper on it. We have found that all over the world, people think morality is declining, that other human beings are becoming less and less honest, less kind, less good, less trustworthy. We see in our data that people have been saying this for nearly 100 years, that suddenly morality has declined. And the only exception is their little circle of friends and family. In that little circle of friends and family, those people have improved. They get more honest, more trustworthy, friendlier and kinder as time goes by. But this little circle of my friends and my family is the exception. The rest of the world is going downhill, but the people I know are improving. So you're exactly right that this is the illusion we all have. And I say illusion because for those watching, if you think about it, if everybody says this, they can't all be right. All those people that you think are declining, they're somebody's friend, they're somebody's family. Someone else has the opposite opinion of them. So we can't all be correct that the people we know are getting better. but the world is getting worse. And so we're very interested in what causes this illusion, but it isn't hard to understand why any animal favors its own kin, right? That's how evolution builds us, to care about our children more than other children, our friends and allies more than others. It's the kind of animal that we are. And I really do think one of the great challenges facing our species in the coming centuries is whether we can outgrow this kinship bias, whether we can learn to think of the entire population of the globe as also our family, also deserving of our care and attention, our time, our money, or whether we're always going to hold it close to those we know and love. If so, I think that our species does not have a long, long future. This is our challenge. Can we get beyond our families and tribes and start to become a giant tribe called Homo sapiens? We'll see. Well, you and I won't see, but our great-great-grandchildren will.
Well, we are really looking forward for that research because it's really fascinating and the consequences it has. I mean, to think as the family or the Dunbar number as the haven of morals is really interesting, and that could explain all the political polarization that we are witnessing today. So if we can expand our inner circle and we can witness, let's say, an outburst of that, that'll be great for our great children and great children, of course, Daniel. I have some questions here from the public, and let me try to find out some of them because we are approaching to the end now. And one question is about whether you have done some research on young people, on the generational differences that we have with the new generations, whether they have the same approaches to reality, to happiness, whether you know anything about that. That's one question I have here from somebody from the public.
Yeah, and I guarantee you that question did not come from a young person. It came from somebody like us who's mystified by these new creatures who have come to replace us and seem to think and feel so differently. This is how every generation feels as you age. The young people seem extremely mysterious, and usually not in a very good way, because they don't have the same norms, the same customs, the same standards. They don't uphold the same moral rules. And so they look to us like they're very, very alien. But this is the natural change in one generation to the other. And I think the similarities between generations are much, much greater than the differences between them. I give myself comfort when I talk to young people who see the world so differently than me, that much of this difference isn't generational, it's an age difference. You know, there's a difference between these things. A generational difference, what scientists call a cohort difference, is the difference between, I'm a baby boomer, I was born in the late 1950s. Some of my students, many of them, were born in the early 2000s. But the other difference between us is that I'm 63 and they're 19 years old. And I take great comfort in knowing that when they are 63, they will see the world much more my way than they do now.
That is really interesting. I mean, there is a difference indeed. The other question I have here is, what do you think, and probably this will be the last one, what do you think about the importance of the role of imagination in terms of our happiness? I mean, imagination is a very important concept, and I know for sure that you have worked on this a lot. So what's the importance of imagination?
Yes, well, the question could mean two things. One, it could mean, if you are imaginative, are you happier? Are people with good imaginations happier? We don't really know much about this. We don't even really know what good imagination means. But if somebody said, Professor, why have you spent 25 years studying the human imagination? If your interest is in happiness, I would say imagination is how we steer ourselves towards happiness and away from misery. Most animals just do whatever felt good in the past. Human beings, we talked about this a little, are uniquely able to imagine the future and steer themselves towards the good one and not the bad. I save money for retirement. I would be happier today if I could spend that money rather than putting it in an account. Why don't I? Because I can close my eyes and imagine being older than I am and hoping I have enough money to live when I don't have a job. I can use my imagination to guide myself towards more happiness and away from the things that might bring me unhappiness. So the answer to the question is, I don't think there's anything more important to human happiness than imagination. And I've spent my life trying to understand the mistakes imagination makes. Imagination works pretty well, but it does make some errors. And I have spent my life and written an entire book on the errors imagination makes when it tries to think about what will make us happy in the future. So to the person who asked this question, thank you. You've asked for me about the most important question about happiness, imagination.
Imagination. Thank you, Daniel. I have here another question and has to do also with the same idea with happiness, something that you have worked a lot on, and is related to what we were talking before. How do you see, this idea that we feel better in our kinship? Do you see how would you expect that this positive effect in our happiness could transmit to the out world? In a sense, do you see any positive effect in the long term? Because what we're living now, this is a long question, so I will not read it. What we're living now in the world, what we are seeing through the news and all that is so devastating and so pessimistic that do you foresee at the end of the day a better future based on what you said about ourselves, in our families, in our circles?
Well, I do think that there is an illusion that current challenges are the greatest. If you asked anybody, are the challenges that we are facing today as a species globally the greatest ever? Everyone would say, oh, yes, of course. There's been nothing like climate change before. Financial crises, political upheaval. But our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents also faced challenges that seem small to us now because we know it all worked out okay. And because we know that it worked out okay, we make the mistake of thinking those challenges didn't feel as great when they were happening. But I think every generation has felt like this generation does. Every generation has wondered if maybe the end is coming, if maybe our species won't survive, if maybe democracy is going away, all of us worry about this. So it's an illusion that we are in a unique time that is worse than anybody has ever experienced before. I don't believe that. We are facing challenges, some of them very, very big challenges. You're asking, will we rise and meet them, or will they destroy us? No one has a crystal ball. I can't answer this question. I see reasons for hope and optimism. Mainly, I think human beings have already all the tools they need to solve their problems. The only question is whether they will use them. And that's why I've devoted my life to studying behavioral science, because all of the problems we face are behavioral problems. Right? None of them are biological problems. None of them are problems of chemistry or physics. They're all about human behavior. If human beings tomorrow would change the way they act, there would be no inequality, there would be no war, there would not be racism, there would be no global warming. Tomorrow, we could solve these problems by simply changing our behavior. We know what is necessary. Can we get ourselves to do it? That's the big question. I don't know the answer. We'll all find out.
Well, you have a long-term view, which is very interesting. And let me remind you that we had 2 or 3 months ago, Jonathan Haidt here talking about social media. Do you think social media is a bad illusion for us? What do you think about social media in general?
Well, I think it's like most things that human beings invent. There are some very positive aspects to it, but of course, we use it unwisely, and therefore there are many negative aspects to it. I think one could use social media in an intelligent way to increase knowledge and happiness. I hope I use it that way. So I look at Twitter every once in a while. I only follow people who tell me interesting things that I wouldn't have known. And so I think I use it like many people would use alcohol, modestly to increase happiness, but not too much. Most people don't use social media this way. They use social media like some people use alcohol or food, too much and all the wrong kinds. On average, I agree with Professor Haidt. I think on average, the effect is very negative, especially for young people. It doesn't mean that social media is inherently a bad thing. It means we are abusing it, right? Fried potatoes are not an inherently bad thing, but if you abuse them, you end up with diabetes and obesity. Alcohol is not inherently a bad thing, but if you abuse it, you can end up with an alcohol problem. So I say the same about social media. If we could learn to use it widely, look, I love the fact that I can pick up my device and see my grandchildren when I talk to them. This is a miracle. It's wonderful. It makes me feel more connected. I don't want you to take my device and throw it away, but we have to learn to use these tools more responsibly.
I think, Daniel, that we are coming to an end. In a way, if there is a lesson, is that understanding scientifically, I would say, what happiness is, it might really help us to become more happy in many ways. I think that's actually something that we have to learn about. I mean, happiness is a very elusive concept since the Greeks. I mean, it's very complicated. But your research is helping us out to understand what it is and how we can uncover and eradicate all those illusions about it. I think, I mean, one final personal question. Do you feel like our friend Matt Ridley, that you are also a rational optimistic or not?
Well, I don't think I'm an optimist or a pessimist, because an optimist is a person who sees things far better than they really are. A pessimist sees them as far worse than they really are. And like most people, I think I just see them as they really are.
That's a very clever answer. Well, Daniel, it's been really, really a pleasure and a privilege having you here in this conversation. I would like to thank Banco BICE for this opportunity that I'm sure many Chileans will value, especially in these difficult times that we are living, not only in Chile, but all around the world, because they are what we're living today is complicated all around the world. We really look forward to have you in person here one day, talking, having a nice conversation, exchanging ideas. And let me remind to the public, this is something that we have to do, that there is a QR code. So please check your mobile, your cell phone, and try to assess what do you think about this conversation. That will be very helpful for Banco BICE to continue with this important contribution to having the opportunity like today we had with Daniel, who is a great academic. I mean, if you check what he has done in terms of his research and just have a look at Google Scholar and you will see how amazing his impact has been on the academic world. So we look forward to having you again. Many thanks, and please continue with your wonderful research and hope to see you soon, Daniel.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for watching.